Support your curiosity by becoming a member of KCRW. That way you can help ensure KCRW music, news, and culture will continue to thrive and fulfill your need to know. Donate at kcrw.com/join.
Warren Only back with Which Way LA. The drought is creating a shortage of water in California, leading to competition between water users and dramatizing an antiquated system for allocating water rights. Mario Arnaudo is a manager of the Arnaudo Brothers Farm near Tracy in California's Central Valley. He's a fifth-generation cattle farmer whose family bought land in the 1960s with water rights that were granted before 1914. 2 weeks ago, though, the pumps were turned off, and there's no water now in his irrigation canal. Mario Arnaudo, welcome to our program.
Yeah, no problem.
What does it mean to you not to have water?
Well, basically, without the water, we got no jobs or income. We have crops that we planted last year that are about 5-year crops, and basically, without the water, they're all going to die, and everything's going to dry up, and that's it.
What do you mean when you say it's a 5-year crop? Does that mean they're not completely grown yet?
Well, we have, I think, 550 acres of alfalfa at that ranch that we feed our cows, and then the extra feed we have, we sell to dairies and other cattle operations. And alfalfa is a 5-year crop. It's basically, in a way, like grass. You cut it 5 to 6 times a year, and it lasts about 5 years long. And we just planted 300 acres of brand new alfalfa last year, and we have 250 other acres of hay that's probably about 3 years old. And without water, it's all probably going to die. So
you were expecting another 4 years of it, and now it's going to die because you can't keep it going. What do you use it for? You say you use it for feed, and you have two kinds of cattle, as I understand it, both beef and dairy.
Yes. The excess feed, we grow the alfalfa for our cows. All our cows are on a pasture, on about 100 acres of pasture grass, and the cows' main source of food is the pasture grass. Mm-hmm. And we feed the cows the alfalfa when they want it, or when there's not as much grass. And then, like I said, any extra we sell to local dairies, other cattle operations, and that's what pays our way.
So if you can't grow the alfalfa, is there any other way you can keep the dairy cows and the beef cattle alive?
Well, we have some alfalfa we have from our first cutting. We'll be able to go a little ways, but for us, it'd probably be better if we just sold all the beef cows and kept the Holsteins and raised the Holsteins, and as we breed them and raise them, and we'll sell them as springers and get rid of them too, and probably not buy any more.
Is there any source of water that you can get, that you can pay for, that you're not getting now?
There is water, but you have to pay $650 an acre foot for it. And for us, that doesn't make any sense because we can't afford it. But the reason why they have that much, or they still have a little water, is because there's guys in Brentwood that have sweet corn and tomatoes and almonds and walnuts, and they need that water or their crop will die. And they're except for the tomatoes and corn, but the trees, that's a 20, 30-year investment. And if you don't have any water on those trees, they're going to sizzle up and die too.
So they're worse off than you are. Now, if it's $650 an acre foot now, what are you used to paying?
$20 an acre foot.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and the reason why I would sell the cows right now is because they're still nice and big, full and fat. They're really heavy, so it makes sense to sell them now instead of trying to keep feeding them cheaply and trying to save your money. You just sell them while they're high and save the money until I'll see how long you keep it going for.
All right, Mario Arnaudo again. Now, when you bought that land, or your family bought that land, they didn't just get the acreage; they also got water rights that go all the way back to 100 years ago. Is that right?
Yeah, actually 101 years.
So you thought that, and the family thought that you were going to get water as long as you had the land.
Yeah, we never thought we would have a water problem over there, but we do now.
Mario Arnaudo, again, with the Arnaudo Brothers Farm in Tracy, a fifth-generation beef farmer, as he just described his situation. Dan Kelly is with us. He's an attorney who specialized in water rights. Now, one of his clients is the Byron Bethany Irrigation District, and that is the district that cut off the water to the Mario Arnaudo Brothers Farms. Dan Kelly, good to have you on our program.
Thank you very much.
You've launched a suit, as I understand it.
Yes, we initiated a suit just last week against the State Water Resources Control Board over their order to cease diversions under our pre-1914 water rights. So
describe how this works and how it all goes back so far.
Well, how the water rights system works?
Yeah.
Well, prior to 1914, there was no comprehensive system for the regulation of water rights, and what happened was there was a couple different ways to get an appropriative water right. One was to simply start diverting water and put that water to beneficial use. The way that Byron Bethany did it was to actually post and record a notice that it was laying claim to a certain quantity of water, and they did that in 1914. And then they developed water, started diverting and using water, putting water to beneficial use, and that's how they established their right prior to 1914. From that point forward, from around 1914 forward, in order to obtain a water right, you needed to go through a more formalized process before what is now the State Water Resources Control Board, and that's how we differentiate permits and licenses issued by the board are kind of called post-1914 water rights. If you obtain them on your own before then, they're called pre-1914 appropriative water rights.
And people who have those kinds of rights are entitled to the water, and they are senior to other people who need water. Is that correct?
Well, if you have a pre-1914 right, you are certainly senior to people who have post-1914 water rights, and that's really the dividing line that the State Water Board used when it issued curtailments earlier this year. They first curtailed all post-1914 water rights. And then essentially what you do is everybody is in a line of sorts, and it depends on the date that your water right was initiated, your priority date. And as curtailments get imposed, they get imposed on the most junior people first and work their way back. And the way it's supposed to work is the more senior people are the last to get whatever supply is available.
Okay, just as a matter of interest to our listeners, the irrigation district that you represent, Byron Bethany, also is the one that provided water to Mountain House, the 12,000-person development that is also near Tracy, and it got its water cut off as well. Was that part of the same order from the Water Resources Control Board?
That was. Mountain House. The Mountain House community is within the boundary of the Byron Bethany Irrigation District and had a water supply contract with BBID. When the State Water Board ordered us to cease our diversions under our pre-1914 water rights, that was for all uses, and there was no recognized exception for health and safety, and so we were directed to cease all diversions.
So that happened, and now, as I understand it, Mountain House has made a contract with somebody else.
Yeah, the South San Joaquin Irrigation District had some water that it made available to Mountain House. We hope to get Mountain House through the summer.
Okay. Now, when you are suing primarily on the basis of the age of the water rights? Is that your basis of action?
It certainly is based in part on the seniority of our water rights. We believe that the State Water Board didn't look at relevant factual matters as they relate to BBID's diversion when they curtailed water rights. We think they overlooked a lot of relevant factual circumstances, our location, the amount of accretions that come into the system above our diversion point that make water available for us, and we think that they didn't appropriately consider that before they curtailed our water right.
Accretions, does that mean somebody else is taking it first?
Well, no, accretions are contributions to the system, and so there are wastewater treatment discharges that occur upstream. There are return flows from groundwater use that occur upstream, and that water should still be available downstream to senior water right holders.
Okay. Dan Kelly, once again, representing the Byron Bethany Irrigation District, which used to service Mario Arnaudo and Mountain House. Eric Garner is managing partner of a law firm in Southern California. He's also adjunct professor of water and law at USC's Gould School of Law. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Warren.
Do you think that Dan Kelly will win in court?
I think it is a difficult argument for Dan. Certainly this particular issue has not been decided, and everyone's entitled to their day in court. But there have been a number of challenges in the past to the state board's authority, including the board's authority to regulate certain aspects of pre-1914 water rights. And consistently, the courts have construed the board's authority broadly. In fact, the board does have the authority to regulate waste of all water uses in California, unreasonable use of all water uses in California, unauthorized diversions. It would seem a logical extension of prior decisions to give the board the authority to regulate the diversions at issue here.
Now, is all that based on things that have happened since 1914? And is there any mechanism for determining who needs the water the most?
Yes, there is, but it's not an easy mechanism. And I think Dan referenced some of the issues that come into play, because priority is not the overriding principle in California water rights law. The overriding principle is reasonable use, which is in the California Constitution. And to determine what is reasonable, a fact finder, be that the state board or a court, has to look at the facts and circumstances of the water uses in that particular matter and make a determination. Sometimes that means the senior user wins. Sometimes it means the senior user has to curtail somewhat to accommodate a junior user. It depends on how a court or the state board views the reasonableness of the uses.
Might you get into a situation where you had a senior user like Mario Arnardo's farm, and you had Mountain House, which has 12,000 people living on it, and you had to make a decision between the two?
This is a very extraordinary drought, and it is unfortunately creating some of those painful issues. When courts or the state board look at these situations, they're in fact mandated to try and establish what's called a physical solution that accommodates both users. But ultimately, if a choice has to be made, yes, it could become that difficult choice.
Let me go back to our first guest, Mario Arnaldo. You've been listening to this conversation. What if you had to, there had to be a choice between your cattle farm and Mountain House?
Well, you have to do what you have to do, but it's not just us that's going to get hit, and pretty soon, without that water, we can't feed our cows, and pretty soon there's going to be a lot less cows and feed, so the price of everything's just going to keep going up. So it's going to take time, but we don't have water, we'll get cut off, or we are cut off, but it's going to affect the price of food and everything else in the long run later.
No question about that. Dan Kelly, back to you. Do you think that you're liable to be challenged in your effort to maintain the pre-1914 rights by reasonable use?
I don't think so. While I agree with Eric that the State Water Board does have waste and unreasonable use authority under the Constitution, there's been no finding or determination that any of Byron Bethany's uses are in fact unreasonable. And to the extent there's a physical solution that's imposed by the State Water Resources Control Board, California courts universally say that the State Water Board needs to respect priorities in implementing any physical solution. And so I don't know that that kind of blanket authority would justify what the State Water Board's done this year.
Eric Garner, are you aware of other situations where huge subdivisions like Mountain House, for example, have been cut off and agricultural users have been able to maintain their water rights?
I would have to say I'm not aware of that situation. I think there are health and safety concerns that relate to that. But this drought has created some very unique situations. I think this is a unique situation from my knowledge.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for being on our program. Eric Garner at USC's Gould School of Law, practicing attorney. Dan Kelly, also an attorney, representing the Byron Bethany Irrigation District. And Mario Arnaldo, you're in tough shape, and thanks very much for telling us about it on our program with the Arnaldo Brothers Farm in Tracy. Thank you all for being on our program.
No problem.
Thank you.
In a moment, how the drought causes more forest fires and makes it harder to fight them on Which Way LA.
Subscribe to the Which Way LA podcast at kcrw.com or download the KCRW app, available anywhere podcasts are found and on all mobile devices.
Warren Olney back with Whichway, L.A. Firefighters in California have already responded to 2,800 wildfires since January. That's 1,000 more than occur in the first 6 months of an average year. Daniel Berlant is the spokesman for the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, also known as CAL FIRE. Daniel Berlant, good to have you on our program.
Yeah, thank you.
1,000 more, and that's 2,800. That's almost double.
Yeah, we have seen a significant increase in our fire activity this year. That has to do with the fact that conditions are so dry. With this drought, we really didn't get the rainfall that we needed for the grass and the brush and our trees to really be able to withstand simple sparks from igniting into wildfire. So with these dry conditions, it doesn't take much for a fire to spark.
What about the availability of water to fight the fires?
That has been a challenge. We've been monitoring our water levels very closely, especially some of our rivers, our seasonal creeks, and even ponds that are on private property. These are key sources of water for us during major wildfires. But with the drought, some of them now are too low for us to actually access to fight wildfires. So in some cases, we have to go further or even truck in the water to be able to fight the fire.
What are you looking for as the year goes on?
Unfortunately, as we continue to move into the fall months and even into the later part of this summer, conditions are only going to get drier. So the likelihood of our fires becoming larger, that potential will increase. So we're definitely bracing for what continues to be a very busy and very active fire season for us.
What does this mean in terms of the agreements between different regions, for example, about the use of firefighters where one community will make them available to another? If you have more and more fires, are you not going to be able to move people around?
Well, here in California, we're fortunate to have a state fire department like ours where we can actually move resources freely across the state. But we do rely heavily on our local partners, the city fire departments, the county fire departments, and then we rely heavily on our federal partners, the U.S. Forest Service, that can move resources across the nation. So as we get into the further and deeper into fire season, those mutual aid agreements will probably continue to be tested even further.
Tell us, if you will, about some of the fires that you have already fought this year. There have been some big ones.
We've had some large fires already this year for sure. Starting off in February, we had a 7,000-acre wildfire in the eastern Sierra in Mono and Inyo counties. That fire destroyed over 40 homes in the month of February when that mountainside should have been filled with snow, covered in snow, and instead, we saw a very devastating fire. But here in just the past couple of weeks, we've been fighting several large fires, including the Lake Fire, which is near Big Bear Lake in San Bernardino County. That fire has continued to burn. Now, while we're making good progress, it still remains over 30,000 acres.
But just quickly, in that one place in the eastern Sierra, generally in February there is snow, and this February you're fighting a forest fire?
Typically, that area of Inyo and Mono counties would receive anywhere from about 40 inches of snowfall during the winter months. So that area should be covered in snow. It's about 7,000 feet elevation, and instead that mountain was dry, and that fire with some wind was able to grow very, very quickly and obviously become very destructive. That was our first major incident of the year, the very beginning of February, and it really was the sign of what was to come. Conditions continue to dry out. Now, while we have received rainfall, we have had storms come through, which have been very nice, but they're often followed by high temperatures, and that warmer than normal winter has allowed that little bit of rain that we did get to dry out. So again, our trees, our vegetation, the grass, the brush just hasn't received the water that it's needed to really withstand fire.
Daniel Berlant, again, a spokesperson for the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, CAL FIRE. Stay with us, if you will. I want to introduce Bill Stewart. He's a forestry specialist at UC Berkeley's Department of Environmental Science and Policy and Management as well. Bill Stewart, good to have you on our show.
Well, thank you very much.
Elaborate a bit, if you will, on what Daniel Berlant told us about how the dryness creates the conditions where the forests become the tinder for fires.
Well, yeah, it's both in our kind of our conifer forests, which we have more in the Sierra Nevada and Northern California, as well as the shrublands. What we're really getting is not just the trees and the shrubs, but all the branches that fell off and the litter that's on the ground that basically is the potential kindling for fires if there is a lightning or sparks from some machinery, that having lots of kindling and having lots of very dry trees, many of them are dead, is just a real much higher level of all types of fuels, from the finest fuels that are really kindling that's going to start the fire to the really big trees that can keep it going for weeks.
Which parts of the state are the most threatened?
Well, from the reports I've heard, is the two aspects. One is kind of the edges where right at the end of where the forests kind of peter out, so the lower elevation pine forests in the southern Sierra Nevada, or some of the forests in the central coast, where it's much drier compared to parts of Northern California. There we're starting to see very high levels of mortality in the pine trees that are really the only trees that can live in some of those drier environments, and even they're not surviving this drought that well. In Northern California, way north, there hasn't been that much mortality compared to what we've seen at the other end. The other aspect is many of the forests, especially the federal forests, which are managed more for ecological restoration, now have very high, there's just a lot of trees on there, and it seems to be, compared to historical levels, there's just more trees than really can be supported with the level of rainfall we get decade in, decade out.
There's a long-running dispute about that. Are there so many trees partly because there's been an effort to put out forest fires that occurred on a natural basis that, in fact, might have cleared out the tinder?
Yeah, historically, when colleagues of mine have looked back at found old records of what did forests look like in areas that didn't have any railroad logging and no roads, compared to what it is now, in many areas they're seeing basically there's twice as much forest vegetation now as there was in these unharvested areas where, you're right, where fires of all sizes basically kind of kept a much more variable mosaic and a lot more open areas. So sometimes the fire would just peter out because there weren't any more trees to burn right in front of it. And now in many areas, we just have a continuous beds of both fuels on the ground as well as trees that could carry really big crown fires.
Might there then be a beneficial consequence of all of this if, in fact, the stuff that's dry and dangerous gets burned out?
Well, part of the problem we saw in the Rim Fire and the King Fire, these really big fires, they've been burning to many analysts much unnaturally hot. So we have, instead of having openings maybe 10 acres or 50 acres or 100 acres, sometimes now we're having 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 acres, where there basically are no trees that can bring in, live trees that can kind of spread their seeds back in there to get regeneration going. So some of these areas where there's very large patches of dead trees, we may be not getting, enough seedlings in there, so they're actually the next forest comes back. It might take in some areas we're just going to have shrubs for a long time in areas where trees were there before.
Daniel Berlant, back to you with CAL FIRE. You mentioned 40 homes being lost up in the Eastern Sierra already in February. Are there other places in the state where homes are threatened?
We have seen other fires over the last several months that have threatened homes as well as that have destroyed them. Nothing to the extent that the Round Fire in Inyo and Mono counties did back in February. But that risk will continue to grow as we get into the fall months. That's when our winds really start to pick up. So we already have dry conditions. We're already starting to see an increase in human activity where fires are sparked. You add that wind, that third combination, and that's what makes our job even harder, stopping a fire, keeping it away from subdivisions, neighborhoods, and that potential for more destruction only goes up.
Are you telling the people in those living areas to be careful and to try to prepare?
Absolutely. The fact is that about 95% of the wildfires that we respond to are sparked by the activity of people. That means almost every single fire is preventable. So we really, especially with this drought, are stressing the urgency and the importance for residents and visitors alike to do their part to prevent sparking a fire, because really one less spark this year means one less wildfire.
Bill Stewart, back to you. Year after year, we've been hearing that people are moving closer and closer to the wildland. Is that part of the problem? Are people getting too close?
Well, we are getting a challenge as people move, especially more recreational-oriented communities. People are moving in there that haven't lived there for decades, and sometimes they want to have that vegetation right next to their yard, and it's good in a kind of a wet year, but that many areas people are kind of bringing on in such a suburban-style landscaping to areas that have a 6-month dry season, and that's actually puts their house much more at risk when the wildfires do sweep down off the hillsides.
Okay, we'll hope for the best and expect the worst. Thank you very much for being with us. Bill Stewart again with UC Berkeley's Department of Environmental Science and Policy and Management. Daniel Berlant with CAL FIRE. Great to have you both.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Remember, you can join the conversation on our Which Way LA Facebook page. In a moment, can gay marriage coexist with religious freedom? That's on To the Point.